All right, let's dive into something pretty strange.
Yeah.
Havana Syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery. You know, it affects diplomats and spies.
Right.
We've got a ton of sources here, congressional testimony, scientific articles,
Wow.
even some background from Wikipedia.
Okay.
So this is a real tangled web, but we're going to try to untangle it a bit,
Yeah.
right?
By the end of this, you'll know what we know and what we don't.
Exactly.
It's fascinating stuff. This might go back further than people realize.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. What is Havana Syndrome?
Well, according to Wikipedia,
Okay.
it's this disputed medical condition.
Yeah.
And it has some really interesting symptoms like, a sudden loud sound, then dizziness, cognitive issues, and a bunch of other problems.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not officially recognized as a disease,
Oh, really?
which makes it even more complicated.
So it's not a disease.
It's not officially recognized.
Interesting. That makes it even tougher to diagnose and treat.
Absolutely. Especially when you consider who it mainly affects.
Right. Mainly U.S. and Canadian government personnel.
Exactly.
Diplomats, intelligence officers.
Mm.
But it's not just them.
Right.
There are reports of family members being affected, too.
Which is scary.
Yeah, that's unsettling.
It raises the stakes when you realize it's not just impacting those in government.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, where did it all begin? Why Havana?
Well, the first cluster of cases was reported in Havana, Cuba in 2016.
Right.
Hence the name.
Havana Syndrome.
Yeah. But there's some interesting testimony from Greg Edgreen.
Okay.
He's a lieutenant colonel, suggesting it might go back even further.
Mm-hmm.
He draws a parallel to the Moscow signal
Oh, interesting. The Moscow signal.
from the Cold War.
This is where things get really interesting. So for years, the Soviets beamed microwave radiation at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow.
Really?
And we still don't know their exact motive.
That's wild.
It is. But a lawyer, Mark Zed, who specializes in national security cases, suggests that they might have stumbled upon a way to weaponize microwaves.
Hold on. Weaponized microwave.
Yeah,
So we're not just talking about some illness here.
potentially not. It's possible this was a deliberate attack.
Using microwaves?
Using a type of technology, yeah, that has been around for decades.
Wow.
No.
Okay, so on one hand, we have this possible historical precedent with the Moscow signal,
Mm-hmm.
suggesting that this might be a deliberate act.
Yeah.
Using a tech that's been around for a while.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's still a lot of debate about what's actually causing these symptoms.
Exactly. And that's where the scientific community comes in. There are different theories floating around.
Okay.
Some researchers propose that what we're seeing is a form of mass psychogenic illness.
Now, what is that?
So mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria,
Okay.
is when a group of people start experiencing similar physical symptoms, but there's no underlying physical or environmental cause.
So it's all in their heads.
Not exactly. It's thought to be triggered by stress, anxiety,
Okay.
or even just the belief that they've been exposed to something harmful.
So in the context of Havana Syndrome, are they saying that these people just think they're being attacked?
It's one interpretation,
Okay.
and it's a serious consideration, especially with so much uncertainty
Sure.
and potential for anxiety.
But wouldn't that be easy to disprove? I mean, wouldn't medical tests be able to rule that out?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the symptoms people experience are very real.
Okay.
It's not that they're faking it.
Yeah.
And these symptoms, they can manifest physically. So, it's not a simple diagnosis.
Okay. So that's one theory.
Right.
What are some of the others?
The other major one is the idea that some kind of directed energy weapon
Okay.
or radio frequency weapon is being used.
Mm-hmm.
And this is supported by researchers like those in a 2022 review by Asadi Puya. And remember, this ties back to the Moscow signal,
Right.
which, gives it some historical weight.
So we've got psychological factors versus high-tech weaponry.
Exactly.
That's a tough puzzle to solve.
It is.
And I imagine the question of whether a foreign adversary is involved just adds another layer.
Absolutely. Now we're wading into murky waters. The 2023 U.S. intelligence report downplayed the likelihood of foreign involvement.
So they think it's unlikely another country's involved.
Yeah, most agencies thought it was very unlikely.
Okay, but I mean, if that's the case, why are some people still saying it's a foreign adversary?
Well, there's a good amount of testimony and investigative journalism pointing in that direction.
Oh, like what? What kind of stuff?
Well, we have Christo Grozev. He's a journalist who's an expert on Russian intelligence.
Okay.
And Greg Edgreen,
Right.
who we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They both testified before Congress. Both made some pretty compelling arguments that Russia is involved.
So this isn't just like some fringe theory then?
No, not at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
And they're not the only ones. There were investigative reports from 60 Minutes, Der Spiegel, and The Insider, all pointing at the same Russian military unit.
Which one?
GRU Unit 29155.
GRU Unit 29155.
GRU Unit 2915555. Wow, okay, so there's a lot of evidence suggesting Russia might be involved, but wouldn't the U.S. intelligence community know about that?
Right, and that's where things get even more complicated. It seems like there's a real disconnect between what the intelligence community is saying and what members of Congress and some investigative journalists are claiming.
So what's going on there? Is someone lying?
Well, the House Intelligence Subcommittee actually accused the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA of a cover-up.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They say that these agencies are preventing the investigation from moving forward.
I'm guessing the agencies deny this? Oh, absolutely. They say they've been completely thorough and transparent, but that denial just adds another layer to all this.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, but let's just say for a minute that a foreign adversary is responsible for Havana Syndrome.
Mm.
What would that mean?
That's a question with some...
Really? Yeah, a Government Accountability Office report from July 2024 really highlighted their struggles.
Oh, wow.
They found inconsistent support from different agencies, long wait times for treatment, and just a lack of clear communication overall.
So not only are these people dealing with a mysterious illness, but they also have to deal with all this bureaucratic red tape just to get help.
It's a terrible situation.
Yeah, it is. It really raises concerns about whether enough's being done to help those who've been affected by this. So we've got this mix of science, espionage, politics, all centered around this mystery. Where do we even go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
But I think what's important to remember is that this isn't just an abstract debate.
Yeah.
These are real people going through something really tough.
You're right. You're right. It's easy to get lost in all this intrigue and forget that there's a human cost.
Exactly. So we might not have all the answers yet, but I think it's, crucial to keep asking questions.
Keep pushing for transparency, accountability, and most importantly, making sure that those who are affected are getting the support they need.
Well said. Let's dig a bit deeper into some of the testimony we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Greg Ed Green's testimony brought up some pretty concerning points about the government's response to Havana Syndrome.
Yeah. One of the things that really stuck with me was his observation that this isn't the first time the government has dismissed the suffering of those who have served.
That's true. We've seen this before. Agent Orange, Gulf War Syndrome, even the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Exactly. He brought up some really powerful examples. It makes you wonder if the government is really prioritizing the well-being of its own people.
Yeah, it does, especially those who've put their lives on the line.
Yeah.
It also makes you wonder if there's a pattern of downplaying or even covering up these potential health risks.
It's possible, maybe to avoid accountability or to protect certain interests.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It really highlights the need for transparency,
Yeah.
accountability from the government,
For sure.
especially when it comes to the health and safety of those who serve.
Absolutely.
Ed Green also pointed out how this lack of recognition and support can really isolate victims.
He did. He mentioned that many people affected by Havana Syndrome can't talk about their experiences
Really?
because of security clearances, and all this bureaucratic red tape.
That must be incredibly frustrating for them.
It is. It prevents them from getting the help they need, and it makes it harder to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, how can we learn from these incidents if people can't even talk about them?
It's a catch-22.
It is.
They need to be able to talk freely to get help, to help researchers figure things out, but they're often silenced because of their work.
It creates an environment where distrust flourishes. I mean, if people feel like their government's not being straight with them, how can they trust the system?
Right. It erodes that trust.
It does.
And without trust, it's really hard to move forward and address these issues.
Yeah. Well, Ed Green didn't hold back. He said that America's best and brightest in national security are being targeted and neutralized around the world.
It's a pretty chilling thought.
It is.
Could this be a larger strategy to undermine U.S. intelligence?
That's a scary thought to think about.
It is.
That someone might be trying to weaken the U.S. by attacking the people who protect it.
Exactly.
So Ed Green isn't just throwing out theories. He pointed to some evidence.
Right. He did. He talked about attacks happening in countries that were traditionally aligned with Moscow, but were developing ties with Washington.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So if that's true, it suggests that there's a motive to target U.S. personnel in those locations.
Like they're trying to send a message.
Exactly, like stay away or else.
Wow. He even brought up that alleged attack in Hanoi before Vice President Harris's visit.
Right, in 2021.
That was supposed to be a big moment for U.S.-Vietnamese relations.
It was. And if these incidents are deliberate acts, it could have huge effects on U.S. foreign policy. It's sabotage.
Wow. And Ed Green talked about some pretty disturbing counterintelligence stuff.
Yeah.
Like harassment at customs, intrusions, even pets being poisoned.
It sounds like something out of a spy movie, but it's real.
Yeah.
And it can be devastating psychologically.
It's like psychological warfare.
Exactly. Meant to wear people down.
Make them paranoid.
Right. Make them feel like they're always being watched.
It's a reminder that espionage isn't always glamorous and exciting.
It's not.
It can be dark and dangerous.
Definitely. And we have to respect and support those who work in this field.
Yeah, for sure. So Ed Green paints a pretty grim picture, but he did offer some solutions.
He did. He emphasized taking care of the victims,
Okay.
starting with immediate health care and financial compensation.
Mm-hmm.
He called for the Havana Act to be fully implemented and even suggested awarding Purple Hearts to those who have been affected.
Purple Hearts.
Yeah.
That seems like a big deal.
It is.
Yeah.
The Purple Heart is a military decoration given to those who are wounded or killed in action. Ed Green is essentially saying that these individuals are casualties.
Of a new kind of war
Exactly, a war that's fought in the shadows.
with these unconventional weapons.
Right.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but it highlights how serious this is.
Yeah.
And it says that we need to recognize those who have been harmed.
You know, it makes you wonder what the future holds for conflict.
It does.
If we're already seeing these kinds of attacks,
Mm-hmm.
what's next?
Ed Green didn't stop there, though. He also urged a much stronger response from the government.
Like what? What did he have in mind?
He wants Congress to push the intelligence community to fight back.
Okay.
He's saying we need to take this threat seriously and make it clear these attacks won't be tolerated.
So he's not just advocating for plain defense. He wants to go on the offensive.
Exactly. He thinks the U.S. needs a strategy to deter these attacks and hold those responsible accountable.
It's a call to action. This isn't just a political issue. It's about taking care of the people who are serving their country.
It is. And that support has to be more than just words.
Yeah.
It needs action. Healthcare, investigations, and protection.
Well, Ed Green made a strong case. Let's turn to Mark Zaid's testimony.
Okay.
He brought a unique perspective as a lawyer representing victims of Havana Syndrome.
Right, and he jumped right into it, saying that he believes the U.S. government and the CIA specifically is not telling the truth about Havana Syndrome.
Wow. That's a pretty big accusation.
It is. He doesn't just make vague accusations, though.
Okay.
He outlines 3 concerns based on his experience and access to classified information.
All right, listening.
First, he says the evidence in the classified reports contradicts the public statements made by government agencies.
So he's saying there's a difference between what they're saying and what they actually know.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, are they being transparent with us?
Okay, what's his second concern?
He's concerned that the information available points to a foreign adversary being involved.
Okay, so that lines up with what Ed Green was saying.
It does.
2 people with access to this information both saying it's likely another government.
Right. And his third concern is maybe the most serious.
What is it?
He claims certain agencies, like the CIA, have actually hindered investigations and withheld information.
Why?
That's the big question. Zaid says it's hard to discuss this publicly because of the classified nature of the evidence, but he says he wouldn't be making these claims if he didn't have credible information.
So he's really putting himself out there.
He is. He even offered to give specific details and documents in a classified setting if Congress was willing to look into it.
So he's challenging them to dig deeper.
Exactly. He wants transparency and accountability.
Wow. All right, so Zaid has raised some serious concerns. What else did he say?
Well, he goes on to give a fascinating overview of the history of directed energy weapons.
Okay.
And he argues that this tech isn't new. He says that what we're seeing now is just a progression of something that's been around for a while.
So it's not like some brand new technology.
Right. He brings up some really interesting examples like Nikola Tesla's death ray concept and even more recent patents for non-lethal electromagnetic weapons.
It's a reminder that sometimes science fiction becomes reality.
Yeah. He also talks about the Moscow signal incident.
Right, where the Soviets were beaming microwaves at the U.S. embassy.
Exactly, and while we still don't know for sure why they did it,
Right.
it shows that directed energy can be used for harmful purposes.
Pretty chilling to think about, You never know what you might unleash when you're experimenting with technology.
That's true. Zaid then shared a personal story.
Okay.
It was about an NSA employee who was injured overseas and developed a rare form of Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's disease, that's a really serious condition.
It is. And Zaid claims that the NSA gave him a memo connecting the country where the employee was stationed to a high-powered microwave weapons system.
So you're saying there's evidence that the employee's Parkinson's might have been caused by exposure to a microwave weapon?
That's what he claims. He presented this memo as evidence during his testimony.
What did it say?
It stated that the weapon is designed to bathe the target's living quarters in microwaves,
Wow.
causing numerous physical effects, including a damaged nervous system.
Okay. So that clearly acknowledges that this kind of technology can cause serious harm. And this memo was from before the Havana incidents, right?
That's right. So the U.S. government has known about the potential dangers of directed energy weapons for a while.
So then why haven't they done more to protect personnel?
That's the question. Zaid goes on to say that the U.S. government statements about Havana Syndrome don't line up with the evidence he's seen.
So he's saying they're not being straight with the public.
Yeah. He criticizes that 2023 intelligence assessment that downplayed foreign involvement.
Okay.
He points out that it only included a few agencies and wasn't really a consensus view.
So there could be more to the story.
Right. He also criticizes that JANA article from March 2024 that attributed Havana Syndrome to mass psychogenic illness.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, but he points out that that article only looked at unclassified information.
So maybe they didn't have all the facts.
That's his point. And then remember that 60-minute segment from April 2024?
Yeah.
The one that linked GRU Unit 29155 to the attacks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that actually contradicted the conclusions of that JAMA article.
So we've got all this conflicting information. It's hard to know what to believe.
Exactly. Zaid's point is that the government needs to be more transparent,
Mm-hmm.
more open with what they know.
Yeah.
And he says that Congress needs to demand answers.
Okay.
Hold them accountable for these misleading statements.
So he wants accountability and transparency.
Yes.
It makes you think, why would the government deny foreign involvement if there's evidence suggesting otherwise?
Right. That's the big question.
Yeah.
Zaid offers some possible explanations.
Okay, well, what are they?
Well, the first is that, admitting to these attacks would be like admitting to an act of war.
Which would require a response.
Exactly.
It's a difficult position for any government to be in.
It is.
Because acknowledging an attack could lead to escalation.
Exactly. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Another reason he gives is maybe they just don't have a solution.
What do you mean?
Well, if they don't know how to protect people from these attacks,
Okay.
then admitting they're happening could cause panic.
Sure, yeah. People would lose faith in the government's ability to protect them.
Exactly. So it's a tough choice. Do you tell the truth even if it might cause panic, or do you keep it a secret
Yeah.
to maintain calm? And then there's the possibility that bureaucratic inertia and the desire to protect reputations are playing a part.
What do you mean by bureaucratic inertia?
Basically, it's when large organizations like the government
Mm-hmm.
resist change,
Okay.
stick to the same procedures,
Yep.
even when they're no longer effective.
So he's saying the government might be slow to acknowledge this problem.
Yeah, because it would require them to
Change how they do things.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's that whole protecting reputations thing.
No one wants to be blamed for a big intelligence failure.
Especially one that could have put people's lives at risk.
Right. So it's possible that some in the government are more worried about covering themselves than finding the truth.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is. Zaid argues that regardless of the reasons, the government's approach isn't working.
Yeah.
This issue needs to be addressed
Right.
for the victims and for national security. He says we need a multi-pronged approach,
Okay.
starting with proper health care.
Yeah, and compensation for those affected.
Exactly. It seems basic, but it's been a problem.
It's hard to believe that would even be a debate.
I know. He also calls for better funding and implementation of the Havana Act.
Didn't that already happen?
It was passed in 2021 to provide financial support to victims, but Zaid says it's not enough.
Oh, how so?
Well, there are inconsistencies in how agencies decide who's eligible for benefits.
So someone who works for the CIA might be treated differently from someone who works for the State Department.
Exactly. Even if they have the same illness.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. He thinks the Havana Act should include more people,
Okay.
regardless of when or where it happened.
Yeah.
And it should cover contractors and military personnel who aren't included right now.
Well, they should be if they're victims, too.
He also brings up that law enforcement agencies haven't been involved much in investigating these incidents.
You mean like the FBI?
Yeah, he says they should be.
Why haven't they been?
He thinks they should be allowed to investigate, not just intelligence analysts.
Yeah, it makes sense.
If these are attacks, they're crimes, and they should be investigated like crimes.
That's a really good point.
It's a different skill set.
Yeah, bringing in the FBI could be helpful.
Zaid's testimony shows there are big gaps in the government's response.
We've talked about the lack of transparency, the accountability,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also this sense of urgency that's missing when it comes to the victims.
Absolutely. He's urging Congress to be more proactive.
Okay.
Demand answers, ensure proper care and support, and hold those responsible accountable.
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
We have to hold our leaders accountable, make sure that the people serving our country are safe. Speaking of holding institutions accountable, that GAO report from July 2024,
Right.
the one that looked at how difficult it is for Havana Syndrome sufferers to get health care.
It was a tough report.
It was.
They found inconsistent support, not enough information, and it's hard to schedule appointments. The system just isn't built for this.
It's like they're being victimized twice.
Yeah.
First, by whatever caused this, and then by the system that's supposed to be helping them.
It's a recipe for frustration.
Yeah, it really is. And the report also criticizes the Department of Defense for lack of communication.
Right.
Can you imagine dealing with this debilitating, mysterious illness and not hearing anything from the people who are supposed to help?
It's awful.
It's terrible. The report did make some recommendations for improvement.
Yeah, like communicating with patients better,
Mm-hmm.
having standard procedures for accessing care,
Okay.
and better monitoring of treatment.
Well, that's a start. But who knows if those changes will be implemented?
It remains to be seen.
It does.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive
It has.
into a very complex and unsettling topic.
It is. We've uncovered these incidents, explored theories, and examined a government response that's been, well, inconsistent at best,
At best.
and potentially obstructive at worst.
And yet we're left with so many questions.
We are. Who's behind this? Why? And how do we protect people?
We need answers. And not just for the victims.
Right.
This has global implications.
It does, yeah.
If diplomats and intelligence officers can be attacked without consequences, using a weapon that leaves no trace, that's dangerous for all of us.
It is.
What does that mean for the future?
It's a scary thought.
It is.
It's a reminder that espionage has real-world consequences.
It does.
That can affect everyone.
The biggest takeaway here is we need to keep searching for answers.
Yeah.
This can't be forgotten.
You owe it to the victims.
We do. We have to demand transparency and accountability.
What can our listeners do? Where do we go from here?
Well, this is just the beginning. Look at the sources we've talked about. Read more. Form your own opinions. Don't just take our word for it.
Do your own research.
Exactly. And don't stop there. Talk about this with people. Talk to your family, your friends, your colleagues. Raise awareness.
Ask questions.
Yes. And don't accept silence.
The truth is out there.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Havana Syndrome.
Thank you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. It's a powerful message. He's saying, get on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Take care of these people or face the consequences.
Right. And he offered some concrete steps Congress could take. He stressed the importance of ongoing health care for the victims.
I mean, that seems obvious. Why would that even be a question?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But like we've said, so many have struggled to get the care they need.
Yeah.
He also called for the Havana Act,
Okay.
the one passed in 2021,
Mm.
to be properly implemented.
Right, to provide financial support.
Right. But he says it has serious problems.
Oh, like what?
Well, the agencies are inconsistent
Okay.
in how they determine who qualifies for benefits.
So someone at the CIA might be treated differently than someone at the State Department,
Exactly.
even with the same illness.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
He thinks the Havana Act should be expanded
Okay.
to cover more people,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of when or where the incident occurred.
Yeah, it should be fair.
And it should include contractors
Okay.
and active duty military who aren't covered now.
Well, they should be if they're victims.
Absolutely. Another point he made was about law enforcement, the lack of their involvement.
So the FBI and others haven't been investigating this?
Not really.
But why not?
Zaid says they should be.
Okay.
That they should be able to pursue leads.
Yeah.
Not just leave it to intelligence analysts.
If these are attacks, they should be investigated like crimes.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a whole different set of skills.
Bringing in the FBI would make sense.
It would. Zaid's testimony really highlights the gaps in the government's response.
Yeah. The transparency issues.
Right.
The lack of accountability.
Well, but also the urgency just isn't there.
Yeah. When it comes to helping the victims.
He's really urging Congress to step up,
Okay.
demand answers,
Yeah.
ensure proper care and support,
Hmm.
and hold those responsible accountable.
He's right. It's a call to action for all of us, right?
It is. We have to hold our leaders accountable.
Make sure those who serve are protected.
Absolutely.
And speaking of accountability, that GAO report from July 2024,
Yeah.
that showed how hard it is for Havana Syndrome sufferers
Yeah.
to get health care.
It was a brutal report.
It was. They found so much inconsistency,
Yeah.
lack of information,
Yeah.
difficulty getting appointments. The system is just not working.
It's failing them.
It's like they're victimized twice.
Yeah.
First by whatever caused this,
Mm-hmm.
and then by the very system that should help them.
It's heartbreaking.
And the report criticized the Department of Defense
I know.
for their lack of communication. Imagine going through this
Right.
with this terrible illness
Yeah.
and hearing nothing from those who should help.
They did offer recommendations
Oh, good.
for improvement.
Okay.
Things like better communication,
Mm-hmm.
standard procedures for getting care,
Yeah.
and more monitoring.
Wow. It's a start.
Yeah.
Let's hope they follow through.
Yeah.
This has been a deep dive
It has.
into a strange and unsettling topic.
It really is.
We've looked at these shadowy incidents,
Yeah.
conflicting theories,
And a government response that's been, well, it's disappointing.
to say the least.
But we're left with so many questions.
Who is doing this? Why?
Yeah.
And how do we stop it?
We need those answers.
Not just for the victims.
Right. This has implications for everyone.
It does.
If this can happen without consequences, what does that say about the future?
It's a scary thought.
It is. Espionage isn't just a game.
No.
It has real-world impacts.
It affects all of us.
We can't let this go.
No.
We have to keep pushing for the truth.
We owe it to the victims.
And to ourselves.
So, what can our listeners do? Where do we go from here?
Well, this is just the beginning. Explore the sources we talked about. Do your own research. Don't just take our word for it.
Form your own conclusions.
Exactly. Talk about it with people.
Yeah. Raise awareness.
Ask those tough questions.
Don't let this be silenced.
The truth is out there.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Havana Syndrome.
Thank you.
Stay curious. Stay informed.
Yeah.
And stay engaged.